Good morning. All right, we left off on Bound for Oregon. They are getting ready to leave for Oregon, so they have a lot of things they have to prepare for. So that's where we left off. In the meantime, Mother was packing the churned butter and homemade soup into pottery jars. She wrapped other provisions in sacks or poured them into jars. Flour, cornmeal, rice, beans, sugar, salt, coffee, tea, dried fruit, molasses, lard, bacon, ham. When she was not readying the food supplies, she was busy spinning and weaving strong cloth and making it up into clothing for the journey. I helped her cut out 2 pairs of pants for Father, and at night she sat stitching them by the fire. "What can we take with us?" Lavina and I asked one morning. Mother thought for a moment. "If each of you would like to take a reticule," she suggested, "you could fill them, and we will try to find a corner somewhere in the wagon for them." So that's the word I want you to look up today. reticule. And I want you to message me and let me know what that is. Okay? So Lavina and I set to work sewing 2 little cloth bags with drawstring tops. Inside them we put a few small toys, like our dolls with the carved wooden heads and the little pottery play dishes that Father had made. There were also compartments for needles and thread and the leftover scraps of fabric we were sewing into quilt squares. I already had 10 squares finished in the 9-patch pattern that Grandma had taught me, and Lavina was just starting hers. And Grandma gave each of us a new thimble. On March 3rd, my 9th birthday, a brand new wagon with red wheels sat outside in our front yard. Although the day was drizzly and cold, Lavina and I rushed out to see it. The wagon looked tall and roomy, with the hickory boughs that would hold the canvas cover in place, curving high over the top. Father lifted us up, and the 2 of us sat side by side on the spring seat. As we sat there, our journey suddenly seemed real to me. For the first time, I felt a little prickle of excitement. "We're going to Oregon," I told Lavina, cracking a pretend whip over the heads of pretend oxen. "Gee-haw!" Father laughed. "It won't be long now," he said. Our departure was set for the beginning of April. Mother was worried about leaving so early since this was the time of the worst storms out on the plains. But so many people were going west this spring of 1852, Father had heard. If we left later, there might not be enough grass for our animals to graze on. It was better to risk storms, he said, than famine. Storms? Famine? When I heard those words, my mind clouded over again with doubts. We would be all alone out on those plains. Just one small family in one wagon. Back in the fall, when Father had first spoken of going to Oregon, many others, like Cousin Fred and Mr. Pritchard, had talked about going too. But as the months went by little, they had changed their minds. Of course, Father said we would be safe, armed with our guidebook and a good dose of common sense, and I trusted Father completely. I wanted to do what would make him happy. Then why was it I still felt so reluctant to leave? Mother had a little flower garden next to the front door. Sometimes when her critical eye decided that their colors clashed, she would dig up one or another and move it to a different spot. Some of the plants popped right out of the ground, but others seemed anchored where they were, clinging with tiny curling root fingers to the small piece of earth. Maybe I was like one of those plants, I thought, holding fast to home. I thought of Grandma. She would not have hesitated a minute, I knew. She had married at 14, leaving her father's farm in Pennsylvania and going off to settle in the wilderness of Indiana. You wouldn't know it to look at her. She was so tiny and frail looking, like a gust of wind would blow her away. But Grandma was strong. With Grandpa, she had chopped down trees to build a log cabin, and in it had raised 8 children. She could paddle a canoe or shoot a rifle as well as any man, she always said proudly. One time, when Grandpa was away, she shot a panther out of a tree. Another time, an Indian tried to steal a ham from up in the cabin rafters. I was stirring a kettle of hot cornmeal mush when I saw him, said Grandma, her blue eyes dancing when she told the story. I just snatched up my wooden spoon out of the kettle and applied it to that Indian's backside. He left mighty quick, I can tell you. And after Grandpa died, when she still had the 5 youngest to raise, Grandma had moved to town and opened up a grocery store. Oh, how I wished that I was a little more like Grandma. While I thought and worried, the preparations for our journey went on. A new bright white canvas cover was stretched over the bows of the wagon. Then the packing began. The wagon had high boards on its sides, making it nearly 4 feet deep. Father divided the space into 2 stories. On the bottom went everything that we would not be using every day, like the huge sacks of flour, medicine, extra clothing, dishes, and wagon parts. This was carefully leveled. Then a strong piece of canvas was stretched over it, making a kind of second floor. On top of this were placed all the things that would be in daily use, neatly rolled and bundled. Father made a wooden grub box with a lid for food, and that sat in the front of the wagon with the cooking pots wrapped snugly in sacks. An outside box was attached to the wagon for halters, hobbles, ropes, chains, axe, shovel, hammer, and other tools. And there was a rack for Father's gun. So just like we do in class sometimes, try to visualize and picture what that wagon was like and how they're getting all of those supplies in there. One morning while I was watching Father repair a harness in the barn, another of our neighbors came to speak to him. It was John Ragsdale's mother, a small, faded-looking woman with a whispery voice. Please, she begged Father, you must take John with you. Father hesitated, looking at her. I could certainly use his help with the animals, he agreed. But are you sure? If he goes, there is no telling when you may see him again. I held my breath, hoping she would say yes. It wasn't surprising that John would want to go with us. We had taken him in a year ago because his stepfather was cruel to him. With 6 younger children to care for, including a new baby, his weary mother had nowhere else to turn. Father and Mother were fond of John, I knew, and there was something about his teasing ways that always cheered me. It would make a difference to all of us to have him along. His mother's flushed face seemed barely able to hold in her feelings, but she nodded firmly. He wants to go, she said. Then we will take him, Father promised. That's all for now. See you later.